Hello everyone, thank you for your time. My name is Maxwell Holland Eberline, and this video will give you a quick overview of my project for Studio One, the Oryssm tabletop role-playing game. This project actually began as an offshoot of a Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition campaign I had been running for the last year and a half. When I took over as Dungeon Master, I decided to put the campaign in my own custom setting, and so Oryssm was born. I ended up writing a great deal of material that placed Oryssm in the Dungeons & Dragons framework, but as time went on, Oryssm began to feel less like Dungeons & Dragons and more like its own unique universe, one that needed a unique set of mechanics and play to go with it. And so I endeavored to create Oryssm as a wholly original role-playing game from scratch. I went into the project with several goals, most of which were based off of some of the lingering frustrations I had had with other RPGs. I wanted to create a system that was easily accessible to newcomers with little of the esoteric rules minutiae that plagues other games. I wanted to create a game in which combat was fast and fun, with encounters that could be resolved in a quick and neat manner. And I wanted to create a setting that shied away from the more traditional fantasy tropes of elves, dwarves, and orcs running around in a fantastic version of medieval Europe to create something more unique. And to my delight and surprise, I managed to achieve more or less all of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How does this game work? Well, Oryssm is a tabletop role-playing game. Most of you are probably already somewhat familiar with tabletop role-playing games, but a quick recap couldn't hurt. In order to play Oryssm, you need a group of players, one of which is the Game Master, or Arbiter, as they are called in Oryssm. The other players create characters using the included rules, and the Arbiter writes stories, challenges, and encounters for them to surmount, thus creating an ever-evolving experience. But like I said, most of you already probably know that. What makes Oryssm different? Well, the basic guts are the same as many other RPGs. Here are the character sheets for Oryssm. As you can see, many of the traditional RPG conventions are present, since I wanted to create something players could immediately understand and be familiar with, and since, well, they're conventions because they work, no need to reinvent the wheel. Oryssm has such conventions as hit points, skills, powers, passive abilities, which are known here as traits, attack and defense statistics, gear, wealth, and experience points. All traditional. What is different, though, is the way in which Oryssm streamlines many of these conventions. For starters, the myriad stats of other role-playing games have been boiled down to a mere three: mind, body, and soul. Once these three are calculated using a simple point-buy system, every other statistic on here can be based off of them. There's only one kind of defense and one kind of attack, since every single attack in this game hits automatically. While this does seem like a big deviation from the norm, I felt it a necessary one to accelerate the pace of combat. Many other games involve multiple dice rolls for every attack, sometimes upwards of 3 or 4. In Oryssm, there's only one, and it determines damage. How does it work, do you ask? Simple. You roll the dice and that's how much damage you do. Done. Granted, you then subtract the enemy's defense score from your total damage, but the pace of combat becomes massively accelerated. This would suck a lot of the strategy out of combat, though, since every single encounter would turn into a damage race, so to counter that I added the evasion system, which allows players or enemies to ignore damage entirely if they beat their attacker in a roll-off. Another way I streamlined combat was the ability point system. Many other games rely on a style of magic known as Vancian magic, whereby each spell or ability can only be used a certain amount of times per day, which requires a lot of bookkeeping on the part of the players to keep track of who used what when. Here, everything is rolled in the ability point system. Simply put, every power and ability in the game comes in two flavors: base powers and advanced powers. Base powers can be used for free and grant ability points to the user, and advanced powers burn off accumulated ability points to fire. This makes sure that players use weaker abilities more frequently, as they're the ones that gain ability points, while they save their big powers for key moments, since they burn a lot of points off. But all of that was theoretical, and I had no way of knowing how the game would work until I applied that on the tabletop. So how did the game fare in playtests? The answer was surprisingly well. I recruited some members of my old Dungeons & Dragons group to assist me, and off we went, and several things soon became clear. The book, for instance, wasn't well formatted, and required players to flip back and forth from one end to the other during character creation, so I reformatted it to follow the path players would take during character creation. Players and monsters alike were doing far too much damage, since my way of increasing the damage of an attack was to increase the number of dice the players rolled, resulting in monsters and players frequently going down in single hits. This was replaced by a flat damage bonus that scaled with level, which kept combat fast but removed the cheapness of one-shot kills. Status effects were too powerful, and so status resistance system was reworked to give players a better chance to resist. And my initial idea of allowing players to use 2 powers in one turn resulted in players sometimes ending combat before other players even had a chance to go, which was toned down to a mere 1 power per turn. But other than a couple of minor tweaks, there weren't any systems that proved unworkable or flat out broken, and the game turned out to be incredibly fast and fun. The final rulebook has been edited and compiled into a single 116-page document, which gives rules of play, how to create a character, and some basic lore and history for the world. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the lore since it could take a while to explain, but it presents a fantasy setting in which magic is so common and so well understood that it's regarded more like a science, with specific rules and formulas. This understanding of magic has accelerated the pace of technological development to the point where the level of technology is more or less on par with our own modern world, with technomagical equivalents for everything from skyscrapers to airplanes to guns to even the internet. I'm still not quite exactly ready to call Oryssm done, as it requires such things as a more in-depth lore section, a large pool of enemies for players to fight, and abilities and powers past level 1, but the end result still exceeds what I thought I was capable of in a myriad of ways. Developing and creating this project has been a joy. It was one of the first times I've seen a creation that felt entirely my own and entirely personal come to life in the larger framework of a game, but my venture into Oryssm is only just beginning. It's a project that I intend to work on until I get it to a commercial and professional level, and who knows? I don't see any reason Oryssm couldn't make the leap to digital games someday.